So please keep your microphone on mute. You should find the icon to do that down at the bottom of your display in Zoom. There's a toolbar at the bottom, and on the far left, usually, there's a mute icon that you click on or tap. And once there's a line through it, you will be muted. And please keep your microphone muted. Also, please remember that we will be taking questions at the end of Donzaleigh's presentation in the chat screen. The chat is set up so that what you type can be seen by the host and co-hosts, and I will manage the question and answer session via chat at the end of the presentation. So thank you very much for joining us and for your patience, and we're very excited to get started.
So welcome again. Donzaleigh is an American actress, an author, and a civil rights activist. She's going to be discussing her book today, as I gave you the title, Partners to History, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph David Abernathy, and the Civil Rights Movement. You can also purchase the book through Romans and get it curbside checkout from the Pasadena Public Library. So the book is a tribute and testament to the courage, strength, and endurance of Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph David Abernathy Sr., and those involved in the civil rights movement, men who stirred a nation with their moral fortitude. Miss Abernathy is the daughter of the Reverend Dr. Ralph David Abernathy Sr. and Juanita Jones Abernathy. Juanita, her mother, is quite famous as well for being actively involved in the creation and strategies of the civil rights movement and in present-day civil and human rights efforts until her death on September the 12th, 2019. Miss Abernathy has presented twice before the Pasadena Public Library for Black History Month. And of course, that was when we were open at Central Library in our beautiful auditorium. So today we're very fortunate that we're able to do this on Zoom. So at this moment, we will now welcome Miss Abernathy to talk about her book. And you can see the wonderful photo that she has up right now. Miss Abernathy, welcome so much and thank you very much. Have any of you read the book prior to today's program? Perhaps you've attended one of her programs at Central Library before and realize she's going to be screen sharing. And as you know, that's a project to make sure that you get everything set up correctly on your computer. And we're very appreciative that you're here today on this very beautiful sunny Saturday afternoon. And so I do have an email from chat from Kathy, and yes, it's a wonderful book. It is a wonderful book and lots of wonderful detail in it. And Miss Abernathy is a beautiful person and a beautiful presenter. So I hope some of you have been able to come to some of our Black History events. And as you know, in March, we're celebrating our 19th One City, One Story book featuring Father Greg Boyle's book, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion. Welcome, Donzaleigh. She has her screen share up. So while we're waiting, I'll tell you a little bit about our One City, One Story program. So Donzaleigh, just please come in and interrupt me as soon as it works out. I'm just talking to fill up the time. But Father Greg Boyle's will be speaking on Sunday, March the 14th at 2 p.m. on the library Zoom. You'll sign up as you do for all of our programs on the library's Off the Shelf. The brochure for One City, One Story will be up on March the 1st. And also we have, in case you haven't read a book or you do not have a copy of the book, courtesy of the Friends of the Pasadena Public Library, we are able to give free for curbside pickup, contactless pickup, to a group, anyone who wants it, but we only have so many copies and it will be first come, first serve, and you'll make your request exactly how you do for your books that you want from your favorite branch to pick up. And then you will indicate that you would like to have a copy of Tattoos on the Heart. It's also available in our catalog. It is on the Cloud Library and it's as an ebook. So you can listen to it and you can hear it. And then we're doing other programs throughout the month. So Donzaleigh, welcome anytime it works out for you. Okay, so here is Miss Abernathy. So Miss Abernathy, welcome. And everybody is looking forward to hearing you talk about your book, Partners to History, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph David Abernathy, and the Civil Rights Movement. So welcome again to Pasadena Public Library. Thank you for coming.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome. So, as Ms. Reeder has says, I'm Donzaleigh Abernathy, and I've written a book, and it is quite challenging to write a book. This is actually the first book. I've actually written another one, but it is called Partners to History, and it's a coffee table picture book which chronicles the history of the Civil Rights Movement. And I learned early in my life that to whom much is given, much is expected. And because they had given so much to me, I decided to write this book. So just 1 second and I'll show you. This is the book, Partners to History. And if you get a chance to get a copy, you will enjoy it. It's a wonderful book that regardless of anyone's age, you can see the pictures, you can read, and you can understand whether you're a small child or whether you're an adult or a senior citizen who just wants to reflect and remember. So now I'm going to go to the screen. Can you all see all of the screen, the main screen? Am I just on the side?
We can see the main screen, but on the side are all of the attendees.
Oh, perfect. So I'm on the side with the attendees.
Yes, you're right under my picture.
Okay, perfect. Okay, all righty. So these are my heroes. That's my dad, Ralph David Abernathy, and Uncle Martin. And I love this picture so much because you get a chance to see, you know, the way they were, the way they conducted themselves. They dressed impeccably, and you know, they used to shop together, and presentation was very important for men of color back then, as well as for the majority of people, but it was really important for them because people would judge us unfairly based on our attire. And it doesn't determine whom someone is, but that's how people perceived them. Let's go to the next picture. Let's see. I love this picture because it shows Uncle Martin. This was just shortly before he passed. You can see a couple of gray hairs in the top of his head. He was very thoughtful, very kind, incredibly gentle. He was not a screamer, neither was my dad. The beautiful thing I can say about the two of them, they never raised their hands and hit us, and they never raised their voices at us, and really never at my mother and Aunt Coretta either. Nonviolence was more than just something that they advocated. Nonviolence was a way of life. And the thing that they were determined about was to make the home a place of love, a place of peace, so that, once you left the home, you would encounter racism and racial hatred and violence. So they went that extra mile to make sure that everything in the home was good for us and safe. I went one too far. Let me go this way. So the holiday that we celebrate is my dad's idea to how he wanted to honor Uncle Martin. And you can hear it, you can see the proclamation. And every year when the holiday is celebrated, it not only celebrates Uncle Martin, but it celebrates my dad and his will to create something to honor his best friend. And also, more importantly than that, the spirit of what they had tried to achieve, so that people of all goodwill could come together and to be in service to their community, the service to humanity. And it's a testament. And when we were little, we used to watch this movie called The Miracle on 34th Street. And it was a little movie about Christmas and children not believing in Christmas. Natalie Wood played the lead little girl, and she didn't believe in Santa Claus. And so what they ended up doing was, when they had the trial to prove that there was Santa Claus, they flooded the court with letters from children all over in support of Santa Claus. And so my father saw that, he saw how much we loved it. And so he had people collect, they collected letters, and people signed petitions, and then he put it in bags and bags, and they had collected for a few years. So then they flooded the halls of the Russell Building and the Cannon Building, which are the halls of Congress, with all of these bags, so that the senators and the Congress members could understand and see that the American public wanted this holiday, and the American public did. And he just observed how it affected us as children, and then how he would bring this holiday to be. And so, and it's a wonderful holiday, but he never lived to see it become a national holiday. But it is. Okay. So this is segregation, and as all of the participants in this presentation, we all know about segregation, and that Black people arrived in 1619 to the United States of America. We arrived at the mouth of the James River to harvest the tobacco crop. We worked from sunup to sundown, and we were never given any opportunities for freedom or assimilation into the population of the United States. We arrived one whole year before the Mayflower sailed into Plymouth Harbor. And every year when we celebrate Thanksgiving, we think about the Pilgrims and the first arrival of people, but that's not the first arrival of people here to the United States of America. That is the first arrival of white people. We were there. I mean, the first huge group. There was also a smaller group of white people that had arrived to Jamestown, but they hadn't survived. And so in order to create an environment for survival, that's why they brought Black people. And they just continue to bring us on a regular basis until these pilgrims arrived, and then they continued to bring more and more and more. And then at one point, we were the majority of the population of the southern part of the United States of America, but we were the formation of America. We cleared the land, We built the homes, we built the buildings, we built the roads. We were the labor that did everything. As Michelle Obama used to say, and this is the truth, she lived in a White House that was built by Black hands. So all they gave to us was a separate world. There was the Civil War that gave us our freedom, and we had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which would recognize the end of slavery. It would give us a Civil Rights Bill, and it would give us a Voting Rights Act and public accommodations. But as Lindsey Graham reminded me, and I think he reminded all of the members of the Senate that evening of the 6th, the evening of the insurrection, he spoke very clearly. He began his speech when he said, and I love Tim Scott, who is the Black man who is a senator from South Carolina. But he went on to say that this wasn't the way to do it, that he didn't agree with what they were trying to do. And then he talked about 1876 and how South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana did a backdoor deal with Rutherford B. Hayes to take away, he said, if you give me the electoral votes, then I will let you all have control of the Negro, which is what the Southerners wanted, so that they could then have a subservient class that would then run their government. But Lindsey Graham referenced that day, and he said, well, you all, this is not the way to do it. If we're gonna do it, then we can do it the other way. And he thought, if you have a commission with Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi and Justice John Roberts, you're never going to achieve it. You need to do basically what Rutherford B. Hayes did in that backdoor deal. And he refused to give his vote. And therefore, our president, Joseph Biden, was certified. However, that made me think, as he spoke that evening, it reminded me so much of the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of Jim Crow segregation, which I was born into, which is what my father and Martin Luther King were born into, which was separate but equal. And Jim Crow segregation was never equal. Separate was never equal. So when you see the water fountains here, you can see the reality that separate was never equal. You see the white water fountain, and then you see the small colored water fountain. And the white water fountain had cold water, and the colored water fountain had warm water, and the white water fountain was clean, and the cold water fountain was dirty. And the exact same thing happened for the bathrooms. And I remember the white bathrooms, the sign for the white bathrooms. I'd never actually gone into one, but I remember the colored bathrooms and how filthy and dirty they were. And my mother decided that we weren't going to use them. And when we would drive on the road, whether we were going from Alabama or to Alabama, you'd carry in the back of your car toilet paper because there weren't facilities for you. And if you were to go to a colored bathroom, it wouldn't be safe. And as a person of color, you were always threatened. You didn't know what kind of violence you would incur. And so there were neighborhoods we were not welcomed in. There were, oh my God, there weren't restaurants for us. We weren't allowed to go to a white restaurant. If you went to a department store, you couldn't try clothing on. You would have to take a string if you wanted to get shoes and then measure the bottom of your foot and then take that string once you're in the store and measure that string against the shoe and hope that it would fit. Well, that was not equal. And Black people were buying clothing just like white people from white merchants, the same white merchants. It just wasn't fair and it wasn't right. So they wanted to bring an end to that world. So that's just like Martin as a young boy. And of course, as we know, he was born on January 15th, 1929. My dad was born on March 11th, 1926. So once my dad was, once he had graduated from high school at the age of 16, what they did was they drafted him into the military. And so he went to Fort Devon, Massachusetts. And as Fort Devon, Massachusetts, at 16 years of age, they decided to make my father the sergeant over all of these older Black men because he was a boy. And they thought, well, this young boy will do what we ask him to do. And furthermore, this young boy will be over these men, and these men will have to respect this young boy. And I guess it was another slap in the face of all of the older Black men who were soldiers. But they loved my dad. He was very charming, he was very witty and smart. And at that point, he'd already conducted his first boycott, which was for the inferior science department at Linden Academy, the little one-room high school that he went to. And so they went to Europe. And once he was in Europe, they fought in Europe. And then from there, they went to, they sent them to England. And while my father was in England, somewhere between Germany and England, he developed rheumatic fever, which affected his heart. And they told him, you know, Ralph, you're really sick and we're gonna have to send you back to Fort Devon, Massachusetts. You cannot go with the rest of the soldiers to the islands off of the coast of Japan. And my father was so disappointed. You know, he used to always talk about that day when he said goodbye to them and how much his heart was so hurt because he enjoyed them. And, you know, they were his men. He was their sergeant. Anyway, they shipped out and they shipped my dad back to Fort Devon, Massachusetts. And so when all of the men arrived in the islands off the coast of Japan, they got off of the ship and they went onto the island to fight the Japanese, and every single one of them was killed except for one man. My father said, when all of the men were killed, except for Willie and for himself, he decided to definitely dedicate his life to nonviolence, but more importantly, to let his life be in service to God. They had told him that he would never live to be 30. And so he decided to throw caution to the wind and fight for what he believed was right because he wasn't going to live. And so he decided to go to school on the GI Bill. And while my dad was at Atlanta University, this was his second school where he was getting his master's degree. He went to Alabama State to do his undergraduate, and it was at Atlanta University. He met young Martin Luther King, who was at Morehouse College. So Granddaddy King, Uncle Martin's father, invited my dad and a group of young ministers to come hear his son preach his first sermon. So Granddaddy wanted Uncle Martin to have an audience of young people, but young ministers that, you know, would, you know, ultimately become his friends, but it also would inspire him that he wouldn't be speaking before an audience of older people, but young people. So my dad was in the audience that day as Uncle Martin delivered that speech, and Daddy said he was so dynamic and he was gifted. You know, he had incredible oratory skills. And at the end of the service, Daddy said Uncle Martin stood at the back of the church and he walked over to him and they shook hands and they had natural chemistry. There was a bond between the two of them. And then they went their separate ways, but they knew that they liked each other and they knew that they would see each other around on campus because their schools were, you know, perpendicular to each other, but it was a small little community of Morehouse College, Spelman College, Clark, and Atlanta University. And so a few days later, my dad had a date with this young lady who was a student at Spelman College. And he was going to take her to a concert at Sisters Chapel. And he called her early on that Sunday morning. He says, are you ready to go out on the date? And my dad said, the young lady said to my dad, you know, Ralph, I'm sick. I have a cold. I won't be able to go out tonight. And Daddy said, but that's tonight. Tonight you will be well. And she said, no, tonight I will be sick. I can't go with you. And my dad said, okay, well, you know, I'll take a rain check. But once my dad got something in his head, he was determined to do it. He was going to do it. So what he did was he went to the concert by himself, and he went early because my dad was always early doing everything. Unlike me, he is always, always early. And so he arrived early. And as he arrived early, he saw Martin Luther King underneath this big oak tree, and the college campus is full of these beautiful oak trees. So he goes over to speak to Uncle Martin, and Uncle Martin's arm is twisted behind this tree, and he's talking to him. But then he realizes, sweet, his arm is behind the tree. And so my dad goes looking. And as he goes and looks, and he sees behind the tree is the young woman who had told him she was sick. She was too sick to go out with my dad. So she had actually stood my dad up for a date with Uncle Martin, and that was the beginning of their friendship. And I guess they went to the concert separately, but Uncle Martin knew that this young woman had stood my dad up for a date and he didn't like her, so he got rid of her. He never went on another date with a woman. And my dad didn't want her either. And my mother used to say, I loved hearing her say that Dad and Uncle Martin used to joke about the young lady, like, what if we had gone out with that girl? What if one of us had married that girl? Thank God. And so they tell Mother and Uncle Red all about it, but that became a running joke between the two of them. Anyway, that's how that friendship began. And then my father completed his master's degree and went back to Montgomery, where he started working at Alabama State. And Uncle Martin then went to Crozier Theological Seminary, and then he went on to Boston University to work on getting his doctorate degree. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. And here you see Uncle Martin there getting his second degree. And so while Uncle Martin is in Boston at Boston University, he meets Coretta Scott King, who is at New England Conservatory of Music, and she wanted to be a singer. She had an opera voice. She was a mezzo, and she had a beautiful voice. And at first, she didn't want to marry him. She thought he was too short, and she was tall, and he was shorter. But he was determined to have her, and he was charming. He was witty. He used to ride his roller skating was his thing. And years later, we find out, that he roller skated, and so did my mom. They were proficient roller skaters. And of course, Aunt Coretta and my dad were not. But anyway, so they got married. And so they're living in Atlanta, and my dad is in Montgomery, and he has become the pastor of First Baptist Church, which was the largest Black church in Montgomery, Alabama. Plus, he is a professor of mathematics and sociology at Alabama State, his alma mater. And he's also the dean of men at the college. There was a small school. It's much bigger today, but it was a small school. And so Edie Nixon, who was the pastor, let me back up. Dr. Vernon Johns was the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Well, my dad worked with Edie Nixon at the Montgomery NAACP. So Edie Nixon was the number one man. My dad was the number two man, and Rosa Parks was the secretary at Montgomery's NAACP. And Dr. Johns, the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, was a revolutionary. So they kicked him out. They told him, we don't need you anymore. People were afraid. And so what they decided to do was invite Martin Luther King to preach his first sermon. And with Dr. Johns realizing that Martin was coming, he went to Atlanta. He said to Reverend King Sr., can I ride in the car with your son to Montgomery? Your son's going to be preaching in Montgomery at my church, my old church, and I'm going to be preaching in Montgomery too. So can we ride together? And Granddaddy said, sure. And my dad, Dr. Johns had asked my dad to let him preach. And Daddy said, of course, but he did not know that Uncle Martin was the young man who was coming to preach. And so along that ride, Dr. Johns tried to demotivate Uncle Martin and tell him that he wasn't good enough to be the pastor of that church. And there were too many important things that were happening in Montgomery and that he just was not ready. And once they finally got to Montgomery, because it was the days of segregation, Uncle Martin needed to use the restroom, and there was no public restroom for him to use. All he could do was, he said, do you think I can go use the restaurant in the people's house that you're staying? And Dr. Johns says, yes, of course. So Uncle Martin gets out of the car, and Dr. Johns walks first. And my father's there to greet him at the door. And then my dad said he saw Uncle Martin walk up into the light, because it was evening at that point. And he said when he saw Uncle Martin's face, he just lit up. He was like, oh my goodness, Martin has come to my front door. Oh my, he was so happy. They embraced each other. He came in, and my dad convinced him that he needed to stay and have dinner at our home, and that my mother was a better cook than he was going to get over there at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And so they sat down, and after dinner, Dr. John started to talk about the crises of the Negro, what Black people were enduring in Montgomery, Alabama, because Rosa Parks was not the first, but the third person. The first person was a girl named Claudette Colvin, who was arrested. She was a teenager, And that wasn't enough to pull people together. And the second was a woman named Mary Louise. And Mary Louise was an unwed mother. And, you know, and in Montgomery, as well as any city in the South, they were very provincial back then. So an unwed mother was socially unacceptable. And so people were not going to rally behind her as well. But when Rosa Parks was arrested, people would rally. But before I can get to that point about Rosa, the following morning, my dad had a radio show. He was the first Black man on the radio in Montgomery, Alabama. And what happened was Uncle Martin called him at the end of the radio show because he'd listened. And he was like, oh, Ralph, I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. And Dad is like, okay, listen, I need you to get on your knees. So Uncle Martin got on his knees with the telephone by his ear. And then Daddy got down on his knees with the telephone by his ear. And my dad said, I'm gonna pray and I'm gonna get you ready. And so my dad prayed, and my dad could pray. And he prayed and prayed and prayed. And then he lifted Uncle Martin up and he said, now listen, you go out there and you deliver a dynamic sermon. Just go. And Uncle Martin felt, you know, empowered. And he delivered that sermon. And he was so dynamic that at the close of the sermon, immediately they offered him the position as the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And so Daddy was happy. I mean, my dad loved Dr. Johns, but more than having Dr. Johns, he wanted to have his friend Martin right there with him. And that was what was the most important thing. And so, like I said, it was the days of segregation. So there were two couples together. They started having babies together, you know, and it was a back and forth. And then, like I had told you before, Daddy was working with the Montgomery NAACP with Rosa, my mother's older sister, Eloise, who died last year, who was 100 years of age. Aunt Eloise married Uncle Morris, and Uncle Morris, his first cousin, was Rosa Parks. So to my mother's family, Rosa Parks was cousin Rosa. And so when Rosa was arrested, and it wasn't planned, as some people have tried to say in recent history, she was 42 years of age. She was a seamstress. She was tired. Granted, she was the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP. She was a member of the Women's Political Committee, just like my dad, who was the only man on the Women's Political Committee that was created by Joanne Robinson, who was an English professor at the college. Anyway, so when Rose, who was the head of the NAACP, called my dad, he said, Ralph, I got to go out of town. He's a Pullman porter, and that was his job. So he's like, I'm going to be on a train. I'm going out of town. Rose has been arrested. Clifford Durr, a white lawyer, was there to get her out of the jail. But we got to do something. We've got to do something. So my dad said, do me a favor, just call my friend Martin. He's the new guy in town. And he said, okay, I'll call him. I don't know him, but I'll call him. Anyway, that day, December 1st, was my mother's birthday, December 1st, 1955. So as soon as Daddy hung the phone with Edie Nixon, he called Uncle Martin. He said, listen, I need you to help me. We're going to do a boycott. This will be my third boycott. We're going to do this boycott. And Uncle Martin was like, well, I'm working on my dissertation. I can't participate. And Daddy said, you must participate. Listen, what I'll do is we're going to have mass meetings and I will pick you up myself and bring you back and forth. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to drive. You don't have to do anything. Uncle Martin said, well, you can use my church. And Daddy said, okay, but I want you to be there with me. And so the following morning was a Black ministers meeting. My dad met the Black ministers, the Black Baptist ministers. He met the ministers that morning and he issued the call for the creation of a movement, which would be a boycott. But it would begin, this movement would begin with this boycott, my dad's third boycott. And sure enough, after that, he went and he met Joanne Robinson, another professor at the college, and she had run off on the flyers. You know, because Joanne was like, listen, Ralph, we have to do a boycott. And of course, she knew that my dad knew about it. And they had run off flyers asking people to stay off of the buses for one day, just one day, which would be December 5th, that Monday, December 5th. And so they took the flyers and they met the school children when they were leaving school. And they started handing them out to the little children. My mother took a little carbon and typed them and cut them. She had a heavy hand. She put a carbon between 6 pieces of paper and type and cut them. And then she paid the kids in the neighborhood, the little boys in the neighborhood, to distribute them to the people in the neighborhood. So there was this one little boy whose mother, he gave it to his mother. His mother was a maid, and they had asked people to stay off on the buses on December 5th. Well, she knew that she couldn't go to work if she wasn't going to ride the bus. So she said, ma'am, could I please have the day off? And the lady's like, what? Let me see that flyer. And then she said, no, absolutely not. You cannot have that day off. You better come to work. And besides that, I will take that flyer. So she took the flyer. She took it to the Montgomery Advertiser, which was the newspaper in Montgomery. Well, they assumed that Black people didn't read, that, because we were, brown, we were intellectually inferior. And there would be no way that, we would read an ad. And they ran a full page ad in the Montgomery Advertiser newspaper. And by running that full page ad, everybody that did not attend those mass meetings knew to stay off of the buses. So their idea backfired on them. And on the morning of December 5th, Uncle Martin came to our house first, early in the morning, because we lived 1327 South Hall Street, and the bus would round the corner in our neighborhood before it would go past their neighborhood on Jackson Avenue, which would then take you towards the white side of town. And when the bus rounded the corner, they stood there waiting for the bus. And when the bus rounded the corner, Mother said, there wasn't a soul on the bus. And normally at that point, the bus is half full. And Mother said they jumped up and down screaming, they hugged each other. They were all so happy because no one was on the bus. And so then Daddy got dressed, and here you can see them on their way to the court, because also that morning of December 5th was Rosa Parks' trial. And they went to the court, and this is the earliest photograph of them. On the other side of them is Bayard Rustin, whom you cannot see, who had come down from the Fellowship of Reconciliation out of Nyack, New York, to introduce the idea of nonviolence. So everybody stayed off of the buses on December 5th, but that evening they had a mass meeting, and people came. And they just kept coming. And there were people outside. It was just insane. My dad said he couldn't believe how many people couldn't fit into the church. We were so hungry for our freedom. And they were so hungry for our freedom because we had endured 244 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. That was 344 years. We were tired. We were hungry for our freedom. And the other thing you all need to be mindful of and remember is that the first person who gave their red blood to bring this nation into being was a Black man named Crispus Attucks. And he was killed in Boston Common because he was standing up for our democracy so that America would become the United States of America and no longer be the colonies controlled by the British. So we were patriots from day one. We were the first patriot. And so we wanted our freedom. And my dad had been in the European theater in World War II and had fought to defend our democracy. And then he had to come back to the United States of America and fight to enjoy that very same democracy that he had defended overseas, that his company had died for. And so this was the time, and people were ready. And here you get a chance to see the people crowding the pulpit. And for every man on that pulpit, so all the men on the pulpit were pastors, but for every man on that pulpit, there was a congregation. And that congregation would represent a minimum of 100 to 200 or 300 people. And my dad, having the largest Black church in Montgomery, he had a congregation of more than 500 people every Sunday. And so you can see here, so here they are standing there in front of the buses. Now, Uncle Martin was chosen after the third day to be the head of this new organization that Daddy named. It was called the Montgomery Improvement Association, because the goal was to improve Montgomery, to improve life for people of color. And here you see Uncle Martin standing there, and you see he's young and sort of naive. He didn't quite know what to do. That's my dad behind him. And my dad has a smile on his face. You can see he's older. So my dad had been the planner and the strategist from day one and would end up continuing being the planner and the strategist for the movement. And Uncle Martin was the voice, and Uncle Martin was chosen as the head because he was the only pastor who was Dr. King, because like I said, he was working on his dissertation and his doctorate. And my dad was so busy being a college professor as well as being a pastor, he had to have an assistant. So the young man standing behind my father is my father's assistant. And then the tall man in the light jacket is E.D. Nixon, who was head of the Montgomery NAACP. And because the NAACP did not have at that point a great track record, that's why they had to create a whole new organization, and then everybody would come and join. But you can see the bus is empty. And the great thing was this bus boycott went on for 381 days. And when for this 381 days, the city of Montgomery lost over $1 million, which was a lot back then. And they were like, oh my God, the majority of people riding the bus are Black people. We'll have to shut down the bus company because nobody's riding the buses. So because of the loss, they decided that they would have to negotiate with Black people. And so what they decided also was, we've got to make this bus boycott illegal. So the police came to arrest them. And this is the photograph from the first arrest. So Uncle Martin had gone back to Atlanta and he was visiting with his parents. And the police came to my parents' home to arrest my father. And both my father's mother and father had died at that point. So he said, excuse me, allow me, could I go into my bedroom and get my jacket? And they said, sure. And so he said he immediately went into the room and got down on his knees and he prayed. He prayed to his parents that he wouldn't embarrass them, that if he knew that they were looking over him and to please forgive him, he was standing up for what was morally right and he had to fight. He didn't know how long he was going to live, but he needed to do this because it was the right thing to do. Morally, it was the right thing to do. And then he got his jacket and then he went down to the jail. And so he called after they, arrested him and then he posted bail and he got out. He called Uncle Martin in Atlanta and he said, they've arrested me and they're going to come for you. And I want you to come back. And Uncle Martin said, okay, I'll come back. And he said, well, when I get there, will you go with me? Because Uncle Martin was afraid. And rightfully so. He said, but will you come with me? And Daddy said, yes, of course. And so you can see my dad has a different tie on. And I'm going to show you the mugshots. And Uncle Martin's hands, by the way, are behind his back because he has the handcuffs on. So you see my dad has a different tie. That's the tie that he had worn earlier for his arrest. And this is Uncle Martin, the mugshot from his arrest. And you can see how his cuffs are pulled up because that's where the handcuffs were around his wrists. And you can see. And so how they were able to achieve this 381-day boycott. And every day, they kept, saying, well, are we ready to end? And the people, the more than 50,000 Negroes of Montgomery said, no, we must continue because we wanted our freedom. And so the churches bought station wagons, which would transport people. And you can see in this car, in this station wagon, all of the people, you can see them. There were 3 rows in that station wagon. And each church had a station wagon. And then sometimes people would use their own cars and they would carpool and act as the gypsy cab or the transportation for the people. And it was very successful, or people walked. And we walked through the rain, we walked through the snow. Here in California, when it rains, people are afraid to go outside. But in Montgomery, Alabama, because we wanted our freedom, they walk through the rain and their rain is a whole lot worse than ours. And they have snow and nothing stopped them. They walked through the blistering sunlight of the heat, and the summer heat is insane. But we wanted our freedom. And so this is how they did it. But there was not one insurance company in the United States of America that would insure these cars. They were insured by Lloyd's of London. They went all the way to England to get insurance for the vehicles. And so they had to go to court because, of course, they had been arrested and they were saying that the boycott was illegal. Well, when you present the facts in front of a judge, of course, it's legal to have a boycott. People can refuse to ride a bus if they want. People can refuse to do anything, and you cannot, by law, make them do anything. And so they've reigned victorious, and you can see them all smiling. Uncle Red is kissing Uncle Martin on the cheek. And this man right here, Mr. Fred Gray, Attorney Fred Gray, he was the lawyer that argued the case. And yes, and so the boycott could legally continue. And then for their summer vacation, they drove cross country. And that's my mother and my father on the right. And then that's Uncle Martin and Uncle Red on the left. And Uncle Martin, that's one of his favorite shirts, because I have many pictures of him in that shirt. And yeah, they came out west. During that period, right before they came out west, there was a Black minister who was upset that Martin Luther King and my dad were running this movement, because he was an older man and he wanted the power. And so he tried to accuse them of theft, accuse Uncle Martin of theft and misappropriations of funds. And so Uncle Martin wanted to confront the man. And Daddy was like, no, we can do it another way. And then Uncle Martin said, no, this is what we're going to do. And at the mass meeting, Uncle Martin blatantly told what this man was trying to accuse him of. And then presented my father, whom they trusted and they knew, who was a math professor, who was also the treasurer. And Uncle Martin was like, I don't have anything to do with the money. Ralph deals with the money, and all the money that's been raised has been here. And my dad was able to let everybody know and see. And then Uncle Martin spoke about there was a power struggle, and that was ultimately what was underneath it. And that more importantly than anybody's individual power struggle was the struggle for our freedom. And that at that point, by saying all of these things, anybody who thought that they wanted to rise up wouldn't. And they realized that there was a bigger picture. And at that case, Uncle Martin was correct in bringing it all out into the open so that everyone would have their heads on correctly, that we needed to pool our resources to come together to create freedom. And it was very effective. It was absolutely right. And here they are going to court. So very shortly after all of that, there was a lady who was coming to the mass meetings regularly, and she was married to a man who was abusive, and he was jealous, and he didn't understand his wife coming to the church. And she was coming to my dad's church because there was a mass meeting at my dad's church every night, right? So he was convinced that his wife must have been having an affair with my father. And so he came to the church during the afternoon to meet my father. And he had an axe, a hatchet in his hand. And he starts making the accusations. And my dad's like, your wife is coming to mass meetings. She's not coming to see me. She's coming to see a church full of women, primarily, because it was the women that were filling the church for the mass meetings. And he was like, no, she's coming for you. And listen, there are three things that I always tell young people that they can do when you're placed in a violent situation. You can fight back. But how can you fight back if someone has an axe or if someone has a gun? You can't have that tussle. That gun might go off and someone's going to be killed. If that person has an axe, how are you going to fight back? So the second thing you can do is run. And that's what my dad decided to do on that day. He took off running because he was an athlete. He was very smart and very fast. So as my dad is running, the man takes aim, takes that hatchet, and he throws it, and it lodges in my dad's shoulder blades on this side. And that's when my dad realized running was not the option anymore. What you needed to do was employ nonviolence and appeal to the subconscious mind of your oppressor, and to by appealing to them with nonviolence, with love, then their subconscious mind will eat away at them, and then they will become ashamed and they will stop. But it's not an overnight success story. But when you see little dogs outside and big dogs, because I've got a little bitty dog and I see all the little puppies, my dog will come or other dogs will come and the little puppies will show them the older dog their jugular vein, and then they'll roll over in their back and they will play submissive so that the older dog knows that they're not a threat. And then the older dog doesn't attack them. And so that's basically how nonviolence works, but it's much more complicated when you're dealing with human beings. Anyway, so that's them going to court. And my father has trepidation on his face and worry. And Uncle Martin has all the files, all the documents to prove that, of course, the lady was there at the mass meetings. And you can see Uncle Martin's determination on his face. And you can also see the growth in him from the very beginning, where he's hesitant and shy. The confidence, you can see it growing up in him. He was a reluctant hero, but he was a hero indeed. And so after 381 days, they were allowed to ride on the bus. The laws had been changed, the transportation laws. And so Glenn Smiley is seated beside Uncle Martin, who was from Pasadena. And at that point, he was living in Nyack, New York, but of course he lived in Pasadena, California. And on the front row is my dad, and beside my dad is Mrs. Bascom. And so Uncle Martin could sit there with Glenn, who taught them the principles of nonviolence, because Glenn had learned nonviolence from Muriel Lester, and Muriel Lester had learned nonviolence from Gandhi himself in the ashram in India. So Glenn was the closest thing they were actually going to get to Gandhi, because at that point Gandhi was dead. And behind them was my father's assistant, the young man. And there's another Black man in the back, all the way back here. That's a Black man. I don't know if you can see the arrow, who by habit had gone to the back of the bus because that's where we always sat. But, and Uncle Martin could talk with Glenn. But when white people got on that bus, there was a different, they changed their seats and it became very tense. And you could see the white man standing in the back. And this would be the first time Black people would be seated in the front. And so Daddy and Uncle Martin were the guinea pigs for that first ride. And here is Glenn in the front, right here with him. And that's just Mother and Uncle Retta, with Fred Shuttlesworth, who would then decide, he was the head of the movement in Birmingham. Well, he decided, well, I'll do the same thing in Birmingham, Alabama. So these are the wives having a press conference. So for every good that would happen, there would be something bad that would happen. And so they decided they were going to create a whole new organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And my parents, my mother said she wasn't going to go because she was pregnant with me. My sister was a toddler. And she said, I'm not going to bring a baby, a little toddler, an active little toddler to Mama King's house. I'm going to stay Ralph behind. And so my mother said she had fallen asleep. She was watching the Jack Parr show, which was late night TV. And she said the angels awakened her. She got up, she turned the television off, she went into the bedroom. And 15 minutes later, the entire front of the house erupted. My sister said plaster fell all around in the bedroom, but nothing fell on her crib. Anyway, my mother was on the phone with my dad at Granddaddy King's house, and Granddaddy King was not nonviolent. You know, he had a gun. And so he starts yelling at my dad and Uncle Martin because Juanita's in the house and she could have gotten killed. And while my mother's on the phone with my dad, they heard the second explosion, which was First Baptist Church. They bombed my parents' home. They bombed my dad's First Baptist Church. They bombed Bell Street Church. They bombed Mount Olive Church, and they bombed the home of Reverend Robert Gratz. So this is how the white supremacists decided that they were going to react to Black people gaining freedom, a certain modicum of freedom. So Daddy said, I'm going back to Montgomery. And Uncle Martin said, I'll go with you. And they left Uncle Retta to convene the first meeting of their new organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And when Daddy and Uncle Martin arrived, Mother was there with the man from the gas company. The man from the gas company said to her, "Lady, you better thank your lucky stars, because if that bomb had been placed 6 inches closer to the gas line, your house would have gone up into bits and pieces. My mother would have died, my sister would have died, and I never would have been born. But I was born months later, and I was born trembling. And my mother had taken everything inside. And as the fetus, I suffered from the trauma that my mother had, and I was born trembling. And I literally shook for more than 6 months. Every day, consistently, I shook." And so Uncle Martin did write in his book, Stride Toward Freedom, with Ralph's home and church bombed, all we could do is get down on our knees and ask the Lord to give us the strength to carry on. And I hope you all have that book, Miss Reader, for people to see. And he talks about it very clearly. And my mother was like the majesty of calm when they arrived. Uncle Martin was so taken back by the calmness of my mother. So here you can see the poster of they bombed our homes and they bombed our churches. And so Uncle Martin has written this book, Stride Towards Freedom. And all it was at that point was a stride toward freedom. So he's in New York signing books. And at this point, I'm already born. I'm a baby. And this Black lady, a deranged Black lady, and Uncle Martin used to call her a deranged woman, she walked up to him and she says, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And she took a letter opener and stabbed him in the chest. And you can see the letter opener right here. But the letter opener on the inside was touching the aorta, which would feed blood to his heart. And the doctors told him if he had sneezed, he would have died. And he used to tell us that. And we were like, "Oh, thank God you didn't sneeze." And we'd crawl over on him and kiss him and everything. And because of it, here you get a chance to see him on the newspaper with the letter opener still in his chest. And so this is them in Albany, because the second major movement after that would be Albany. And they weren't able to achieve everything that they needed. And Dr. William Anderson was elected as the head of that. And even though he was a medical doctor, he was a doctor. So everybody who led every movement was a doctor somebody. And so people respected you more if you had a doctor in front of your name than if you were a Mr. Black people would respect you, and white people as well. And so this is Anniston. Anniston wasn't a movement. The Freedom Riders were not so much a movement as young white and Black students who decided they were going to test integration on transcontinental buses. So the laws had been changed, and the law was that, Black and white people could ride on the bus together. Well, in the North, when they got on the bus, everything was okay. But once this bus arrived in Anniston, Alabama, oh my goodness, the white supremacists and the Ku Klux Klan threw fire Molotov cocktails and set the bus on fire. When they got to Birmingham, the police stood back and witnessed the white supremacists beating up the Black and white students. And my dad, when they got to Montgomery and they got off of the bus, people beat them as well. But Daddy decided he was going to have a mass meeting, and he told Uncle Martin to come over from Atlanta, because Uncle Martin and Uncle Retta had moved at that point. And this is Jim Zwerg, the young white man, because I think they broke his tooth, and he's there with John Lewis, who would later become our congressman. But they beat him as they got off of the buses because they were angry they were riding the buses together, even though they had the legal right to ride the bus together. So Uncle Martin comes over, and at the beginning of the mass meeting, Mrs. Virginia Durr, whose husband, Clifford Durr, who had represented Rosa Parks when she was arrested, Mrs. Durr got out of her car, which is this car that we see, and the white supremacists flipped her car over, and then they set that car on fire. And here you can see the car is on fire. and they threw bricks and rocks and bottles at cars, and all of the people were in the church, and the white supremacists said, we are going to kill everybody in the church. And they surrounded everybody in the church, and it was absolutely frightening because they were angry not only that Black people were in the church having a mass meeting, but they were angry that white people were there and with these Black people. And so that's Uncle Martin in my dad's office. So it's, becoming the wee hours of the morning. They don't know what they're going to do. And so they ended up calling Robert Kennedy, who was then the Attorney General of the United States. He was the brother of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And so you can see people are starting to sleep because they've been there so long. And Bobby Kennedy is going back and forth with Governor Patterson, who was the governor of Alabama. And, Governor Patterson's solution was, listen, I'm just going to let the police and their friends take care of the people and patrol. And Bobby Kennedy said, well, that's not good enough. They are the Ku Klux Klan. The police are the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not going to let that happen. So Bobby Kennedy said, I will send in the National Guard. Forget you. I'll send in the National Guard. And that's what Bobby Kennedy did. And so that truck that you see in the bottom right is the truck from the National Guard. And if you, all the way in the right corner, you can see the National Guardsmen, the very same men who are patrolling and protecting our Capitol right now. And here you get a chance to see them leaving my dad's church. And that's Uncle Martin right there. That's my dad. And that's Wyatt T. Walker, who worked for them. And all of these men, because the men went out first. They exited the church first. And then you see the National Guard in front. And here you see the people getting in the trucks, getting ready to go. And they delivered them to their neighborhoods where they could get home safely, because still in the surrounding neighborhoods were the white supremacists still out there. And it was absolutely horrendous. I'll never forget this day, because that evening, these young white students and Black students were sleeping in the living room of my parents' home. But what was so incredible was waking up, seeing them in the morning. And, we'd had white people that would visit us, Glenn Smiley and all of these other people, but never so many en masse, and never people sleeping on the floor in my parents' living room. And then the kids got everything together. And then all of a sudden the media arrived. And they had the press conference about the Freedom Riders and the decision that the Freedom Riders would then continue. And there is John Lewis, who was the Freedom Rider, who was speaking on behalf of the Freedom Riders. And this is in my parents' little dining room area. And John Lewis was very funny. He used to say, well, it was so strange. Mrs. Abernathy didn't have a dining room set. She only had a breakfast room set. They lived in a parsonage. They'd only been newly married. They didn't have a lot of money. And so she only had a little breakfast room set that they're seated at. And then you can see all the way in the corner, you can see that's our little rocking horse right there. And John Lewis is speaking. And they made the decision at that point that everything was going to continue. And they would continue under the protection of the National Guard. And so there's the National Guard, and they're out. And that's at the Trailways bus station. And I'm sure you all remember Trailways, which doesn't exist, and the National Guard was there. And so while the National Guard is there, Daddy and Uncle Martin and the Black and white Freedom Riders all went into the white waiting room and ordered, and everything was okay because the National Guard was there to protect them. And then the bus went on down, and the National Guard would protect them all the way to Louisiana. However, with the National Guard then gone, the following morning, my dad went with some friends back to that same white waiting room and tried to integrate the lunch counter. And so they called the police, and here's a policeman coming to arrest them. And instead of reaching for my dad first, he reaches for that white man who's seated with my dad, because the thing that they could do is they could attack white people and say to white people, you cannot be associated with Black people. And so they arrested that man as well as my dad. And you can see them, and you can see the angry expressions and the tenseness And this is my dad right here. And he's got a bit of a slight of a smile because he knows he's going to be arrested, but he's standing up for which is right, which is his right to sit at a lunch counter, and he should be entitled to be served. So they arrested my dad that day. And there you get a chance to see his mugshot. And so Uncle Martin and Uncle Retta are living in Atlanta at this point, and that's a picture taken in Atlanta with Martin and Yolanda and Dexter, because Dexter was born in Atlanta. Yolanda and Martin were born in Montgomery. And Martin, we used to call him Marty. And so Uncle Martin would come back and forth to our home, and that's our home in Montgomery. And here he is on the phone and just doing business in our house. And this wasn't the same night, but that's me right there seated on his lap. And Uncle Retta's kissing him on the cheek, and that's my mother. And everything happened in my house because my mother was the hostess with the mostess. She was the definitive cook and hostess, and she was very elegant in her presentations. Her father was the most successful Black farmer in the entire South during the 40s and the 50s, according to Tuskegee University, because they would send people to photograph his farm, the home, the livestock, and everything. So my mother was an affluent Black woman at a time when most Black people were not. And here you get a chance to see me on, my dad is holding me, and Uncle Retta's on the phone in our house, and that's Uncle Retta, that's me, and that's my sister. And this is the King family, and this is where they lived in Atlanta. And someone asked me recently my earliest memory of, or the primary memory. And the primary memory I have of them is this house, coming to visit them at this house when I was 3 years of age, and the wallpaper, and Uncle Martin picking us up at the train station. And it was a segregated train, and we couldn't ask for anything, but it was just wonderful to take the train from Montgomery to Atlanta to see Uncle Martin and Uncle Retta, and to see Yoki, because it was really all about Yoki, his daughter right there, who is my sister's best friend and who was my oldest friend. And when I moved to Los Angeles, Yolanda moved to Los Angeles. And so we did all our social lives together out here because we grew up doing everything together. And here we are on the porch of my parents' home. And this is Easter time. And this is 1327 South Hall Street. And I show this photograph because it is the important thing for what would happen in Birmingham. In the Black community, we bought an Easter basket. And you can see all three of us have Easter baskets. And we had brand new Easter dresses. We had those crinolines, fancy panties, and then they bought the fancy headband for you. And in the Black community, the parents bought a big hat and the mother would buy a new dress. But Easter was the second largest time for purchasing of clothing or anything. There was Christmas and then Easter. In the Black community, it was all about Easter. And so in Birmingham in 1963, they would boycott the stores, because if we couldn't try clothing on in the department stores, why were we going to spend our money at Easter? And so right before we get there, here they are. This is Albany. And the young people are taking a knee just like they do today, like Colin Kaepernick has done. And we weren't trying to be disrespectful. And you can see the police standing behind. But when we're not being violent, we're not looting, we're simply taking a knee and praying and being humble in the face of oppression. And here you see college students again taking the knee, and they're being mocked by young white kids, and that young white man holding his hands up, oh yes, all Lord and Master, acting like he's all God, when he isn't. And these young Black students are on their knee in the face of humility, trying to be humble, to say, listen, we just want our part of the American dream. And here they are getting ready to go to jail. And I always show you this photograph because that's how they were. They were impeccably dressed, and both Mother and Uncle Retta have on their pearls as they take their husbands to jail. And here they are in Birmingham. So right here you can see them taking the knee, and in the front is Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and that was the first day. And the whole message is, we're going to boycott the department stores, and we're going to protest in the lunch counters, in these department stores so that they would give us freedom. Otherwise, we're not going to spend a penny. And that's what happened. And so they were so angry, the people in Birmingham, they would become violent because of this. So this is the Good Friday March. And you can see Daddy and Uncle Martin being arrested, and behind them, you can see these men getting down there on their knees. They're getting ready to go down. This man, you can see he's mid stride as he begins to kneel. But they arrested them on this Good Friday March. And here they pulled Uncle Martin, you can see by the seat of his pants, which was incredibly uncomfortable. But the point was to try and make it as uncomfortable for him as possible. And my father was bigger, so they could only pull him by his shirt collar. They led him in the paddy wagon. And once they got him in the paddy wagon, the police chief, Bull Connor, said to separate them. And this would be the first time that Daddy and Uncle Martin had been separated. But unfortunately, they don't say my father's name here on the cover of this Jet magazine. They just mention Uncle Martin's name, but they had been doing everything together, everything. And this is them in the jail cell, but like I said, in Birmingham, they separated them. And this is a nice jail cell. That was not what they had. And they put them in solitary confinement. They put them in a jail cell where there was just a sliver of light. They had no mattress, no bed, no sheet, no pillow, no toilet, just a hole in the ground and toilet paper. My dad had a Bible in the same situation. My dad read the Bible, and on teeny weeny little pieces of toilet paper, Uncle Martin wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. And the letter from the Birmingham jail was why we could no longer wait for our freedom. Because like I said before, it had been 244 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow. That was 344 years. We were tired. And that's why we couldn't wait anymore. And this is Mother and Aunt Coretta visiting them in jail, and they're leaving the jail. And my mother has on her gloves, because that's what you did back then. They were very formal. And then so the young people took to the streets. And this is 16th Street Baptist Church. And the young people of their own volition appreciated what was happening. And the young people were just like the young people were in the Black Lives Matter movement that happened across America and across the world this past summer. The young people took to the streets. And they did it of their own volition. They left their high school, they left their elementary school, and they decided to march from 16th Street Baptist Church to City Hall. And then once they got to the City Hall, they would get down on their knees and pray. That was it. That was all they were trying to do. But the police were angry. They didn't like that. And so they started to arrest them. This is the police chief, Bull Connor. And here's the signs. It's like, don't buy segregation. And the Birmingham merchants were unfair. And they were asking for equal opportunity and human dignity. We wanted to be able to try clothing on. And all they said, Birmingham, they said, well, listen, Black and white people can stand beside each other in the elevator. Well, what is standing beside each other in the elevator? When you needed to buy that dress, what were you going to do? Just hold it up in the air and hope it fit. And if it didn't fit, there were seamstresses that had to alter the dress. If the pants didn't fit, the seamstress would have to alter it. The same thing for a suit. If a young woman bought a brassiere and it didn't fit, you'd have to take it to a seamstress. Well, that wasn't right. If white people could try clothing on, why couldn't Black people or Latino people or Asian people? And that's the thing you have to be mindful of. Any person that was of color, that was non-white, was mistreated the same way. Asian people endured the same level of prejudice that we did. And so these are children, little children. I mean, what are they? 8, 9, 10, maybe, being arrested because they were trying to walk to City Hall. There's a teeny weeny little girl who's being arrested. And the policeman asked her, what did she want? And she said, I want to be free. And recently I was reading where they had mocked Kamala Harris for saying that her mother had taken her to a march and that she was plagiarizing Martin Luther King. Well, no, she wasn't, because that was the slogan. What do I want? Freedom. When do you want it? Now. What do you want? Freedom. When do you want it? Now. And so I used to say the exact same thing. And Kamala Harris, as a small child, said the exact same thing. And that little girl right there in this picture, she said the same thing to the police officer who was so outraged by what he heard this little girl say. And Uncle Martin spoke about it. And they were thinking the press, the very conservative press, who would attack our vice president and say that she was plagiarizing Martin Luther King, when in fact she wasn't. Because I know that I used to say it repeatedly and repeat that chant. Anyway, you can see this little child getting arrested. And this was the thing, can a man love God and hate his brother? Can you love God whom you cannot see and hate your brother whom you can see? Based on the shade of his skin. When you put the flowers in the garden, they're all different colors. You see the birds, they all fly together. You see dogs, they play outside and they don't discriminate because one is one breed versus another. So why would human beings do that? Human beings were creators of separation, and subsequently their separation on race and religion would be the cause of wars, unnecessary wars in the world. So didn't come on a meeting because now they're very concerned. All of these young people are being arrested. They had filled the jail cells everywhere. And so then they decided to take the dogs, and you can see this dog is biting this young man's abdomen, and no one is fighting back because everybody had been schooled in the principles of nonviolence. You couldn't march or participate unless you knew nonviolence and realized you couldn't fight back. And then they turned the water hoses, and this is actually day 2 of them turning on the water hoses on the young people. And here you get a chance to see, the photographs speak for themselves. The power of the water hose pulled this man's shirt apart, but Glenn Smiley, who was there, he said that when he saw the water hose, it was so strong, it peeled the bark off of a tree. And here you see the young people. And the question was, why? All they were doing is marching, and they were not being riotous. They walked in a line on the sidewalk. And so they forced them into this park where they then pummeled them with water. And so doing this would raise the consciousness of America, because people would see on the photograph in the evening these incredible photographs of young people being mistreated, and rouse the nation. And I show this piece here because at the bottom of it, it says, Friends of Freedom, put your shoulders to the wheel and let us push until freedom rings from every mountainside. Yes, even southern mountainsides. Respectfully submitted, Ralph D. Abernathy. So this is my father's Friends of Freedom letter from 1959. And Uncle Martin would then turn around and use those words and make them famous in his I Have a Dream speech. And that's what they did. They would share, information, or share their sermons, or share their thoughts and ideology. But yeah, these were my dad's words. And Uncle Martin made them famous. My dad quoted, put your shoulder to the wheel, but let us push until freedom rings. And those were my dad's words and his thought. And so that's them with Mahalia Jackson. And because of what they did in Birmingham, people came from all over the nation and of all races and all religions. And we wanted an end to segregation because Brown versus the Board of Education had passed in 1955, and schools were still segregated. We wanted voting rights in the South. We wanted equal pay. We wanted a civil rights bill. And you get a chance to see. We wanted our part of the American dream. We wanted an end to Jim Crow segregation. And this is Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, and Charlton Heston. And the movie stars had given the money. And just before this, Daddy and Uncle Martin had a rally in Los Angeles, and Burt Lancaster opened up his home, and all the movie stars gave. Paul Newman and Marlon Brando and Burt Lancaster organized the whole thing, Sammy Davis Jr., but they all came, Joanne Woodward, Paul Newman, Judy Garland, Betty Davis, and they all supported this and gave the money which would make it possible for all of these young people for them to pay the bail for the young people, but also would give that foundation and what was necessary to get everybody to Washington. And here are these people, Charlton Heston, and then unfortunately they tried to make him the face of the NRA and to make him the face of oppression when he wasn't. And he told me before he died that I'm a liberal man and I supported civil rights. He said, and I supported the right to bear arms because it's a part of the right of the Constitution. But I don't want anybody to think that I'm a racist. And I loved hearing him tell me those words directly. And this is my dad speaking that day at the march. And I don't remember my dad speaking because I was a teeny weeny little girl and I was running around. I was 6 years old and just running around Abraham Lincoln's statue. And then Uncle Martin got up to speak. And I remember being told to sit down on the steps. And I'll never forget that day as long as I live. And as Uncle Martin spoke, that's Uncle Retta right there, that's Whitney Young, and that's my mother right there. And this is my dad's arm, and that's my dad seated right down here. And I'll never forget, he said, our 4 little children, and they would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. And that's when my sister and I jumped up and down screaming. It was just victorious. And for every good that would happen, there would be a bad that would happen. So I'm going to show you the bad that happened because the people in Birmingham, the white supremacists, were angry because everybody had come together, Catholics and Jews and Protestants. And so they placed a bomb 2 weeks later, September 15th, at the window of the girls' bathroom at 16th Street Baptist Church. And 5 little girls were in the bathroom that Sunday. They also called and they said, you got 5 minutes. And Carolyn McKinstry answered the telephone in the church office. And she didn't know what they were talking about. So she hung the phone down and she went around to collect the Sunday school offering. And this is the body of the girls being carried out. And these are the girls. So this is Carol Robertson, who's 14 years of age. She's in the upper right-hand corner. She was a fair-skinned girl, and her family lives across the street from my mother's family, from our home. Below her is Denise McNair, who was 11 years old, whose relative, Paulette, is my father's goddaughter. And right here is Cynthia Wesley, who was 14 years of age. Her mother was so poor when she was born, she gave her up for adoption, never thinking that this is what was happened to her daughter. This is Addie Mae Collins, who was 14 years of age, and her mother didn't have enough money to afford to have her have a school picture. Anyway, 5 of them were in the bathroom, and I'll show you her sister. This is her sister, my friend Sarah, who was in the bathroom. Anyway, so they're all in the bathroom, and Sarah was in the stall. She said that she came out of the stall and she was washing her hands. And Denise McNair down here had said to Addie Mae, will you tie my sash? And it was the first Children's Day ever at the church, and the girls were all wearing white dresses except for Sarah, who was wearing a red dress because her mother was so poor, and the white woman that she worked for gave her a used red dress, which Sarah was a new dress. So Sarah got a chance to wear something new to church. And Cynthia and Carol, these 2 girls, were on the sofa by the window. And as Addie Mae tied the sash, Sarah said they heard a click and they turned to the window, and in came brick and mortar and shards of glass all on top of the girls and covered their bodies. And a shard of glass went into Sarah's eye, and you can see all the glass on her forehead. And it was just a horrendous thing. And Red Cross said that when they found the girls, they must have known what had happened because they were all piled together and their bodies were piled one on top of the other. And then right after that, they murdered our president on November 22nd. Mrs. Kennedy said They murdered her husband because of his stand on civil rights. And so what had happened was President Kennedy, when all of this was happening, addressed the nation on television, and he said to all of the white people in America, this is our problem, this is an American problem, and that the answer to the solution lies within your homes, and that you need to teach your children how to love and to put yourself in the position of a Black person who had endured all of these years of slavery, then a civil war, getting a little bit of rights and then having it taken away from them, and that it must begin with us. And he appealed to everybody, and it just tore the white supremacists up, and they decided they were going to kill him. And that's what they did. What I wanted to say that I didn't, my parents received hate mail. My dad used to get hate mail, and one of the hate mail, pieces of hate mail, they said that in 1964, it'll be a whole new day for the Kennedys. And it was a blatant threat for President Kennedy. And so that hate mail spelled out that they were going to kill him. Anyway, right after that, Uncle Martin got the Nobel Prize. And I know that he felt bad about getting the Nobel Prize because people had been killed and he was getting an award. And he always had a strange feeling about it because he felt responsible. He and Daddy both felt responsible. That's them singing after the Nobel Prize ceremony. And that's the delegation that went to Oslo, Norway to support him and to be there for the Nobel Prize. And then that's just Mother and Daddy and Uncle Martin and Uncle Retta. They had a vacation. I don't know where they went, but they were going somewhere. And then that's just the King family picture because in 1963, Bernice was born, and that's their home. They still lived in Johnson Avenue. And then right after that in 1964, the young white students took to the South to register Black people to vote. And the white supremacists were angry that the white students were joining up with the Black students. And so in Neshoba County, Mississippi, they burned down a Black church. And Michael Swerner, who was the head guy there, that's Michael Swerner, and he was working with James Chaney, and they had gone to Ohio and they had picked up Andrew Goodman and was bringing him back. And so they went to the church to see what had happened. And sure enough, the church had been burned down, and Michael assured everybody, everything's going to be okay. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. And we're still going to register people to vote, and we're going to try and get you all the right to vote. And they were going to teach everybody. And as they left the burned out church, the police saw them and arrested them and put them in the jail cell, and they waited until night. And then they released them in the wee hours of the morning. And as he released them from the jail, they were followed by white Klansmen, white supremacists. They ran them off the road, pulled them from the station wagon, took them out into the wilderness, and then hunted them like dogs and shot and killed them, and then buried them in an earthen dam. And only in the testimony did we find out exactly how it happened. There was a member of the Klan who told the truth. And I documented in my book because they never talk about it. But this Klansman, he said he couldn't live with what they had done and he needed to tell the truth. And that's how they knew, the FBI found out where to find the bodies of these two young Jewish men and one Black man. And this is Daddy and Uncle Martin. My dad is speaking to the police, not Uncle Martin. And my dad was bold and determined. And this is the Bloody Sunday March in 1965. And we know what happened because they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge that day. Jose Williams was the leader of the march, not John Lewis. And Jose had called my dad and asked if he could lead the march. And Daddy said, let me call Martin. And he called Uncle Martin. And Uncle Martin said, no, I don't think we should let him march. And Daddy said, if we don't let Jose march, he'll be angry with us for the rest of our lives. We have to let him march. And so they led the march because the people had shown up. Originally, Uncle Martin and my dad were supposed to be there, but my dad said, I can't be there that Sunday because I can't find anybody to stand in for me on the pulpit. So Uncle Martin said, well, Ralph, if you're not going to be there, I'm not going to be there as well. And they were supposed to tell the people in Montgomery and Selma not to show up, but the people showed up anyway because they wanted the right to vote. And that's so, and John Lewis got kicked out of SNCC that morning because the SNCC people didn't want to be involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference people. And there was that power struggle that was happening between those two organizations. So John Lewis said, forget you, I'm marching anyway. And he marched on into history when he crossed that Edmund Pettus Bridge. That's John Lewis on the ground right there. And so they tear gassed the people, they trampled them, they beat them with billy clubs, and then they followed behind them and trampled them on horseback. I'll never forget that Sunday we sat there and we had dinner at Pascal's, and Daddy and Uncle Martin were outraged by what had happened. And so Daddy and Uncle Martin went down to Selma. And you see everybody's on their knees. And Jesse Jackson said, if we say that Martin Luther King was our leader, then it's only fair and only right to say that Ralph David Abernathy was our pastor, because he was the spiritual leader of our movement. And you can see here he is praying. And then President Johnson said, come to Washington, let's talk. And he wanted to create a Voting Rights Act. And the movie Selma, they got it wrong, because this is the truth of what happened. They decided that, President Johnson said, I want to create a Voting Rights Act. And Lucy Baines Johnson sent me this photograph because my dad did not appear in the stories and in the pictures. And she was like, but your father was there. I run the Johnson Library, I know. And I know I need to come to an end. I know I'm probably talking too long, but you can see them smiling as they leave the Oval Office. And Lucy told me that her father grabbed Senator Dirksen by his collar and yanked him up, and he said, you will support and vote for this Voting Rights Act. And LBJ was quite convincing. And I love this picture of Uncle Martin because he's smiling. He's seated right beside him is Charles Evers from Mississippi, whose brother was Medgar Evers, who was assassinated in his driveway. And that's with their heads together. And they have their heads together here at this day because they had murdered Reverend James Reeb at the second attempt. So there was a second attempt to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they were met by the police. And so everybody got down on their knees. The thousands of people, black and white, got down on their knees before the police. And my dad prayed the prayer, and you can see those photographs in my book. And then they turned around. And then that night, Reverend James Reeb and two other white ministers got food in the soul food restaurant in Selma. And when they left the restaurant, the white supremacists and Klansmen saw these three white men leave a black restaurant, and they beat them unmercifully and killed Reverend James Reeb. And so this is the official start of the march. And you can see this is Rabbi Abraham Heschel, Ralph Bunch, Uncle Martin, Daddy, a Catholic nun, and John Lewis. And they all have leis around their necks because the Hawaiian delegation sent flowers all the way from Hawaii. And this lady right here is Constance Baker Motley, who was a judge who worked with Thurgood Marshall. And yeah, and that's them walking. And here you get a chance to see the white and black ministers as they march. And it was black and whites together, and it was about the rights to vote. And this is Jim Lethera, who marched with one leg for us to have the right to vote. And so that's me, that little girl right there with my mother and her hand in my back, my brother and my sister, as we're marching in Montgomery. This is day 4 of the march, and I'm marching too slowly. I'm holding everybody up. And so the minister comes, and you can see he's pulling me along the route to make me walk faster. And then this is that official photograph. And then this is day 5, the last day. And we're waiting for Uncle Martin, and that's Congressman John Lewis and my father. And this is Reverend Reese, who led the Selma movement, and my mother. And then we officially started marching because Uncle Martin ran late. He ran a little late, like I run late. And, but it, it didn't matter because prolific, and he would deliver an amazing sermon that day. And then they're marching. And that's us marching. And then Uncle Martin's getting ready for his speech. The people are all we're getting everything together, and he's getting ready for the speech at the Capitol. And then the rain comes again. And my brother is there, Uncle Martin is studying his speech again. And that's just Daddy and Uncle Martin. And they've delivered he was just great. He said, how long, not long, because no lie will live forever. How long, not long, because the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's him speaking. And then right after that, Mrs. Lauza, this lady here, they would murder her that evening because she had a Black man in the front seat of her car. And a white woman was not allowed to have a Black man in the front seat of her car. And they didn't even know when they were attacking her that she had participated in the marches. They were just attacking a white woman who wasn't following protocol. And then this is the signing of the Voting Rights Act, and the president is handing the ink pen. He would sign one letter and then hand off the ink pen. And this is his daughter behind, Lucy Baines Johnson. And on this right corner, which I don't think you can see because of the photos, is a woman named Vivian Malone, who would have integrated the University of Alabama with James Hood in 1963. And that's Uncle Martin's birthday. That's one of his birthday parties that he lived to enjoy. And that's their home, the King home, at dinner at the dining room table. And right off of here is the playroom, the family room, the TV was there. And then Mother decided we were going to integrate the schools. And so that's us. This is me, that little skinny girl. And that's what I did in history. I integrated the elementary schools. That's my sister, my mother. That's Martin Luther King III, and Yolanda and Aunt Coretta. And I don't know where my little brother, Ralph III, was. I guess he wasn't there. But he was supposed to be in first grade. I was in third grade. I was 8. And that's a close-up of that shot. And that's us in the back of the station wagon as we're leading, because we were happy, but the parents were unhappy. Anyway, that's just us as the family, the kids. That's Uncle Martin's office, and I'm coming to an end now. And that's them having a staff meeting with their staff. And you can see their staff is integrated, because that's what it was about, integration. Integration was a revolutionary concept. They wanted us all to be separate in the world, the white supremacists. They were, their message was separation. White people over here, Black people over here, Latino people over here, Asian people over here, and then separated by religion. And here Dr. Benjamin Spock has joined the movement, and he's helping. And my father is so exhausted, he's asleep while Uncle Mother is speaking. This is the cover of my book that I wrote. And this is a close-up of that photograph. And it's Rabbi Eisenrath, who is carrying the Torah because of the Jewish people who were very much involved in the civil rights movement with us. This is Memphis. And in Memphis, this march becomes violent because the people were not workshopping nonviolence. Anyway, so they're back at the Lorraine Motel, and they're going up the steps to their hotel. And Uncle Martin was very upset. He didn't understand why their room had been moved. And Jesse Jackson had moved their room to the second floor because their room was on the first floor. But now they were on the second floor, and Uncle Martin did not understand. And anyway, they had taunted him already, and there had been a bomb placed on the airplane, a bomb threat. And Uncle Martin had said to my dad right before they left Atlanta to go to Memphis, why do they have to do me this way? Why do they have to taunt me? Anyway, it was on this balcony the next day that he would be standing. And he apologized to Jesse Jackson down below. He said, I didn't let you speak the night before. I'm sorry, but I wanted Ralph to speak, but why don't you come to dinner? And Daddy and Uncle Martin shared the same room in room 306. In the Memphis Civil Rights Museum, they say it was just Dr. Martin Luther King's room, but it's not. It was both of the room. They shared that room together. And right now on auction is the sign-in sheet for the hotel room. And on that sign-in sheet, you get a chance to see Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King shared that same room. Anyway, Uncle Martin was standing there on the balcony. And my dad said he was putting on his Aramis cologne. He was getting ready to come outside, and he heard something that sounded like a firecracker. And all he could see was Uncle Martin's feet. And he said he got to Uncle Martin and he saw that the bullet had entered the cheek and had blown off the cheek. And he kept saying, Martin, this is Ralph, Martin, this is Ralph. And Uncle Martin moved his lips to try and say something, but nothing would come out. his eyes had been wobbly, and he focused in on my dad, and he kept trying to communicate, but he couldn't. Anyway, the ambulance arrived. They took him to the hospital, and they cut the clothes open, and there was this huge hole in Uncle Martin's chest. It was one of those bullets that explode in your body. And the doctors came over to my dad, and they said, listen, there isn't anything we can do. If you want to have these final moments with him, you can, because he is not going to make it. And so Daddy went over to Uncle Martin, and then he stopped breathing, and then he was gone. So I'll just show you these final pictures of Uncle Martin. And this is the march in Memphis. They finally gave us the right to march. And that's Daddy and Uncle Retta and Rosa, my sister, that's me. And that's Dexter, that's Martin, that's Yolanda's shoulder. That's my brother Ralph III's head. And then we got a chance to view him, and I'll never forget this viewing. That was really devastating for me because I didn't want to come and say goodbye. And that's my brother. That's Uncle Retta's, Uncle Martin's secretary, Dora McDonald. Uncle Retta, Dexter, Martin, Uncle Bob Williams, who was a singer and had been Uncle Retta's friend at New England Conservatory of Music. And then that's Bernice, and that's Yoki, Uncle Martin's most favorite daughter, most favorite child. And then that's their babysitter. And you could see where they had patched the skin together on the cheek. And then my dad let him be carried in a wagon to represent the poor people that he served. He served poor people, not rich people. And he only asked to bring us all together. And his message was one of love. That's me, this little girl right here, the little one in the white dress. And Coretta said all the children were to wear white that day, the girls. And that's just a close-up of the casket. And that's us going to the gravesite where we would say goodbye. And that's me and my sister, Harry Belafonte. This is Aunt Coretta's sister. This is Harry Belafonte's wife. That's my mother's head right there, and that's my brother. That's just a close-up of me and my sister. I was so hurt and so angry. I didn't understand how someone who could ask the world to love each other could be killed. It didn't make sense. And that's Yolanda, Uncle Martin's favorite child right there. And that's my dad doing the benediction for Uncle Martin. He said, and so I commit his body, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. That's my dad carrying on and then asking for the holiday that we celebrate. And more importantly than my book, this is my dad's book. This is me and my dad. And that's the book that my father wrote, And the Walls Came Tumbling Down, that literally tells the entire history and the story of their lives together. And Yolanda said, it's the most beautiful book written about her father ever. She got a chance to know that side of her father that she didn't know. And now they're all gone. And so I'm left to tell you the story. So that's what I do. That's our story. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen. And if you all have questions, please ask.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Abernathy. This has been such a wonderful, emotional afternoon. Your photos, your history, your personal experiences of what you and your parents and your family and all your relatives endured is something that's really affected all of us this afternoon. And we thank you so much for your time to share that with us and for your beautiful, beautiful book. We're all emotional. There are 2 copies for everyone to know of Partners to History in the Pasadena Public Library. There are several ebooks, audiobooks, cloud books, videos of Martin Luther King, of his life. There's actually 49 subjects under his name. We have, as a book, Letters from Birmingham Jail, that you can listen to. On Hoopla, an audiobook, we have Stride Toward Freedom, and lots of other wonderful things that you can read. And I just think we're just all overwhelmed with your presentation today, as we were the past 2 years that you've done this. This is 3 years that you have shared this with us, and you've included a lot of new pictures and new research that you've done. And I can't thank you enough on behalf of the Pasadena Public Library. So we'll probably all take a great big breath, and we can have everyone send your questions, and our librarian, Shauna Reed, will ask you the questions, Donzaleigh.
Okay.
So thank you so much, very, very much. So Shauna?
I don't see any questions quite yet. Folks are probably just putting their thoughts together, but I personally want to thank you. I mean, we all, Martin Luther King and your father and all of these figures are so iconic and so huge, and the tremendous amount of things that they accomplished and did and wrote and said, and your stories and your pictures make them so everyday human, cousin Rosa and Uncle Martin and your father. It makes it like they're in my living room and you're telling me these stories about your family. So it's very emotional, and I really appreciate you coming and doing this today. I really look forward to seeing Partners in Crime, sorry, Partners Against Crimes, and just, experiencing more of it. So thank you so much. It's
Oh, you're
amazing.
welcome. Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor. And yeah, it's a labor of love. And Daddy used to say, we are ordinary people. We've been put in an extraordinary circumstance, and we arose to the occasion. And it's just that simple. And all of us can do the same thing. Upon all of us to do that now, to create that beloved community, and to do our part. And yeah, I didn't name the book Partners to History. My editor did. Peter Hoffman, he came up with the title. And, I thought it would just be remembering my daddy and Uncle Maude and something simple. And no, he was reminding me that it's bigger than that. It's history. And to me, they were just the men in my life. But, they changed the course of American history. And the one thing that's really interesting is that I met Desmond Tutu. And he said, when we saw what Ralph and Martin were doing in Montgomery and in Birmingham and in, Chicago and Memphis and the March on Washington, we knew that we could do that. We could use those same principles of nonviolence and free people from apartheid in South Africa. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
And so nonviolence, that's the way. And it's nonviolent civil disobedience. That's the thing. It's not going along. You're being disobedient to the system that's wrong, but you're being nonviolent in your approach, So, anything else?
I don't see any questions.
There's a chat. Someone has a chat.
Chat. So there is a question. I don't have a suggestion. I do want to say, though, how honored I am to have been witness to such a magnificent and wonderful telling by you, Donzaleigh, and of the most important stories that has happened in our world. So thank you so much again. These are in the chat. A lot of people are saying what a wonderful writer and storyteller you are. And they're asking, do you still want to do projects about this era as an actress, or would you like to focus on a different period of time?
Well, actually, I've written a screenplay, and I'm supposed to complete my draft, my third rewrite for my producers. And the thing that I had left out, strangely enough, was, I didn't have much about Daddy and Uncle Maude. I wrote about other people and about the movement itself. And it's told through the eyes of the little girls in Birmingham, Alabama. And was the original person that was telling the story, because she survives. You need to talk about your Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I took them for granted. And so now it's just putting them into the story. I just didn't want it to be a regular story about Daddy and producers. I started writing another screenplay, which is, right now I've got 2 scripts about them and but I'm too old, to really be a major part in the movie. There'll be a small part for me. I'm just the screenwriter. I'm just the storyteller, but I tell the story through my voice, like I do every day. And I didn't think that I should tell a story, but I'm finding that my voice was missing, and my voice makes it personal and people can identify with it. And so I want the audience to experience and share it. So now they share it, through the eyes of a little girl. And I hope they will appreciate it. I hope they will like it. I know we've got a great producer, and hopefully we'll have a studio. And then the hard part will be casting, finding the right actors, and finding actors who are young. They were saying they want to go with name actors. And I was like, well, I just want us to go with people that look like them. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I've got a great producer, and we've been in talks with a couple different directors, and so we'll see who we land with. But I have a good idea who we will go with. We'll see. But we've got our camera guys already, our cinematographer, and yeah, I'm so looking forward to it. I love being an actress. That's something I can't do. I'm an artist. I'm an artist. And so, and then I've written another book. My other book is The Historical Chronology of Race in America from 1619 to 1955. And so it begins with everything before, and it's race, and you soon learn that there's the persecution of the Irish and the Catholic here in the United States of America, as well as the Native Americans and Black people. And it's all of those things. It also includes the original draft of the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson drafted, and how in that original, he talks about taking innocent people from a foreign land and shipping them in a deadly passage. And it's just very interesting. It's very, I like that one, but it's more like like an encyclopedia, because I'm just putting the facts and then putting it together. I just love history. I don't know. It's just my passion. And I like reading. I own more books than anything else in the world. I've worked in every library of every school I've ever been in. And when I was little, I used to want to be a librarian because I love books. And the libraries were segregated. Black people couldn't go to the library. So I couldn't go to the white library until I integrated the elementary school, and I went to the white library and I saw all of those books. And it was incredible. And Daddy and Uncle Martin used to read. All they did was they had books and they were always reading. And so that's why I wanted to be a librarian. So.
Well, we're delighted that you're with us today, and you are a beautiful, beautiful writer, a storyteller. We will so much look forward to what you're doing in the future, and so that we can be a part of it and do it, be more aware, even more aware of everything that you have experienced in your life and your family as well. And as Shauna said, you just make it so much come alive when you call all of them, they're your family. Another question is, did any of your siblings become ministers after the wonderful examples that they saw in your father and the doctor of Martin Luther King?
So my brother Ralph III, we always knew he was going to become a minister, and he didn't, he said, I don't want to be a minister. I don't want to be a minister. And, he became a state senator. He was in the state legislature, and then he became a state senator. And then he got arrested. And while he was sitting in jail, he was lost. And he said the only thing that gave him strength was reading the Bible. And while he was there, he decided he was going to become a minister of the gospel. And so for the final years of my brother's life before he died of cancer, he was a minister. And that was his thing. And Daddy Nakamadnu used to say, you know, when you've been called, you can run, but you cannot hide. And if God has a calling on your life, you will have to respond to that. And that invariably, no matter what, that will become the path of your life. You know, like Uncle Martin used to not want to be, you know, a civil rights leader, but he couldn't run. That was his destiny. And my brother used to say, my brother who became the minister, they had a date with destiny and a rendezvous with eternity. But they didn't see it that way. You know, they just thought they were just doing something every single day. But I've realized that I can preach. I've been invited to speak at churches. And, you know, I used to read the Bible every single day. It was just my thing, you know. And so I can deliver a sermon. And I think I can deliver a sermon because I used to sit and listen every Sunday night, because every Sunday night Uncle Mon would come over to our house, right? After church, we'd have our church service together, then we have our Sunday dinner together. And then Sunday evening, they come back to my mother's house and re-preach the sermon that they preached that day. And I'd be a little girl there listening to them. So I know how to preach. And I figured that was why I know how to do this, but I just know how. And I live my life, you know, I suppose, kind of like a minister in that I serve, but I don't have a church or a congregation, but I have been called upon to deliver sermons. And I don't know how to explain what comes over me, but something comes over me and I can quote scripture and have a message, and I feel very comfortable doing it. I just think it's just being the daughter. And Bernice is a pastor. She's Uncle Martin's youngest daughter. So she's the pastor among the two families. Dexter's not a pastor, neither is Martin. And my sister lives in Germany. She was traumatized so much by all of this. She left the United States of America.
Whoa. Well, you are definitely your father's daughter, and your mother, who was the hostess with the mostest.
Yeah.
And I can see, and I'll leave and thank everyone so I can see why you are such a wonderful representative of everything in the civil rights movement, a wonderful lecturer, speaker, and how you're called upon to do this so much. So I just remember 3 years ago calling and talking to you to ask you to speak at the library, and your mother had just passed away, and how difficult it was. And I'm just so glad you said yes then. And we've developed this friendship, and Pasadena Public Library thanks you so much for this today. It was just a beautiful, beautiful presentation. That's all you can say. Leaves us all very emotional with lots to think about. So thank you so much, Donzaleigh Abernathy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Opens up your video, and we'll give you all a wonderful, wonderful round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, go to the Pasadena Public Library and pick up Partners to History contact list pickup. It'll just continue what this afternoon meant to you. You can also order the book from Romans Pasadena. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
All for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Oh, wow.